Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm a clinical psychologist and an accredited EMDR therapist, which means I use a lot of EMDR in my work, and I get a lot of questions about what is EMDR, what does it stand for, how can it be delivered, and can it help me with the difficulty that I'm experiencing. So I thought I'd make this short video just to demystify EMDR, give a bit of information about it, and I hope it's helpful for you. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And it's a bit of a mouthful of a name and also a bit misleading because we don't have to use eye movements. So we can use this light bar here, and that's what we usually use, but we also are able to use these pulsars that just sit in each hand, and they also have lights on them. We can also use self-tapping, so people can self-tap. It might be easier just to call it processing. And by processing, what do we mean? So if something happens to us that is too much for our brain and our body to make sense of at the time that it happens, what can happen instead is all that raw information is taken and just thrown into a metaphorical cupboard, and the doors are shut. And our brain kind of says to itself, I'll deal with that later. But the problem is a good time often never comes to do that processing. So when we do EMDR, we're making a space and a time to do the processing that couldn't happen at the original time. Because if it remains unprocessed, then if there's a reminder of that event, what can happen is those doors fly open, and all that raw stuff, the way that our body felt, our emotional state, the thoughts that were happening at the time can come back and feel almost like that event is happening again. We might even have flashbacks to the original event. So when we do the processing, it's as if we're going close enough to that stuff in the cupboard for our brain to do that work, to kind of take the things out, fold them up, put them back into the cupboard. So that then, if we're reminded of it, the doors don't just fly open and it sort of attacks us. So once things are processed and our brain has done the work by getting near enough to that memory to kind of take the bits and pieces out, fold them up, put them back into the cupboard, then if we're reminded of it, we can go to it if we want, but we have a choice. We don't have to go to it. We're not wiping memories, but we're changing our relationship with the memory so that our brain acknowledges that's in the past, it's over. So what conditions can EMDR treat? Originally, EMDR was a trauma treatment, and it came from the experiences of a lady called Francine Shapiro. She had cancer, and it was successfully treated, but she found that in the aftermath, she couldn't think very clearly. It was almost like she had a mental block. And one day she got up and went for a walk. And as she was walking, she was moving her eyes in time with her footsteps. And she noticed that when she did that, it was almost like something unlocked in her brain, and it was able to kind of process stuff and think more clearly. So being an inquisitive soul, she retrained in psychology and tried it out with friends, relatives, just to see, does this make a difference for you? And the people who she tried it with said, yeah, something's shifting. And so then she did a study with veterans, and she found that they reported much lower levels of PTSD symptoms. So originally it was a trauma treatment, but subsequently we found that it can be useful for all sorts of conditions. So not just single event traumas, but complex traumas that took place repeatedly over a longer period of time. It's also really helpful for anxiety, panic attacks, phobias. So it can be really good for things like aerophobia, fear of flying, emetophobia, all sorts of different fears that we might experience. Performance anxiety, so we can think about future events and almost have, rather than a flash back, a flash forward, where we anticipate this future event and perhaps imagine a sort of doomsday scenario, everything going wrong. And the good news is that with EMDR, we can process those future anticipated events with equal success. EMDR also works for nightmares, and it can help to address recurrent nightmares especially. to give alternate endings and just take the wind out of their sails. I also work in cancer, and I've done a lot of work in health settings. And EMDR can be really helpful for things that happened along the journey with an illness. So it might be diagnosis or treatment or even the aftermath of if things have been successfully treated, where now? What happens now? EMDR also works for depression, and it can be really powerful for grief and loss. And what people describe happening with grief is almost that there was a kind of dark cloud hanging over the end of their loved one's life. When it's processed, it's almost like that cloud is cleared and they can see the whole life and remember more. So it can be really helpful. EMDR is also really effective for pain. Perhaps surprisingly, EMDR works on the body as well as what's happening in the mind, and it can change how we feel physically. It can also be useful for addictions, issues around behavioural concerns and relationship issues. So it can really address a lot of different things, and there's ongoing research all the time identifying different areas that it can be helpful with. So how does EMDR work in practice? So initially, what we would do is take a history, do a full assessment to get a sense of what's happened for you in your past and where you want to go in the future, and think about anything that's coming up in the present as well that maybe is triggering and taking you back to certain events or any flash forwards that you might be experiencing. Once we have a picture of where things are, where things have been, and where you want to go, we would then look at what we call resourcing, which is just making sure you've got things that help you to feel grounded, safe, secure, calm, regulated. And we would take as long as it needs over that. Usually it's a session or two just to get things in place, make sure you feel regulated. And that in itself can be really freeing because it can give a sense of, okay, even when these things come up, I've got tools that help me to feel safe and calm and regulated. Once we've got a clear picture of where things have been, where things are now, and where you want to go, and we've got those resources in place, we then move towards processing. So we will have identified historic events that you might want to work on, triggers in the here and now, and we would select from those things to process, and we would work out what that target is, an image that goes with it, any negative belief that might be associated with it, and a positive belief that you want to work towards. So we've got a direction of travel within each session that addresses those self-beliefs and moves towards positive self-beliefs. And we think about what's coming up emotionally and in your body, and then we just start processing. And when we process, we would use either the light bar, we can also just use the good old hand as a thing to follow. We've got the pulses, or sometimes people prefer to self-tap. If we're doing it online, there's different tools that we can use to put a moving dot on the screen to provide that left-right movement, or sometimes people prefer to self-tap. And what that does is allows you to keep one foot in the present whilst one foot is in that other, usually past event, so that processing can take place. And we like to think of it almost like we're on a train, we're in the carriage, the event is outside, we're not going fully into it, but we're just getting close enough for that processing to happen. And once we go to that memory and you find that you're experiencing minimal disturbance, minimal distress, we would then move towards thinking about the positive belief, making sure that that positive belief about yourself is as strong as possible, and then just process out any remaining physical sensations that you might be experiencing in relation to that memory, and then close it down. And that's the processing of that event completed. And then we would just work through the identified memories and targets that we'd come up with, and then think about installing a template for the future that might be a sort of version of yourself doing the things that you want to be doing in the future. So that's EMDR in a nutshell. I hope that that was helpful in explaining what it is, what it can help with, how it works, and do reach out if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. Thanks very much.